Hi, and welcome to our recorded lecture on pulling insights from customer discovery. We're excited to have you here as a part of the Female Founders Program, and now that we've given you some insight in what lean startup methodology looks like and how primary customer discovery research can help inform your startup, we now want to give you an opportunity to learn how to effectively analyze the data that you'll get from your customer discovery interviews. So, as we've stated before, the source of truth really comes ultimately from the customer. So, as you're going through your startup journey and you are making pivots to your concept or your solution, those pivots should be informed by your customer discovery interviews and what you heard. Now, we know that most of us understand and are used to conducting secondary research, going to Google and looking for something that can back up your position, and leveraging quantitative data. So, we're used to pulling surveys or other quantitative information to try to back up our position. What we are really asking you to do is to get out of this comfort zone and go conduct your own primary research by sitting down with your customers and talking with them one-on-one to try to understand what's going on in their world. That will lead you to have qualitative data. So this will be information from the conversations that you're having that you will then need to analyze and decipher. So really, when we're talking about a startup journey and we're talking about building something new, a new product, a new service, what the truth really comes from is your personal interaction with your customers. And the importance of this interaction is that it helps you, as the entrepreneur, build empathy with the people with whom you're hoping you will eventually benefit with your solution. So by creating a strong understanding with your customer and your stakeholders, you can better grasp what their needs are, and as a result, you will be able to build a solution and build a concept that truly creates value and creates a value for your customer and is able to answer their needs. When we go out and do customer discovery interviews as a part of our Lean Startup methodology, we are really looking for you to conduct hundreds of customer discovery interviews throughout the process of you creating your business. Now, during this program, we are just going to have you dip your toe in and practice by conducting roughly 5 customer discovery interviews. But in our National Science Foundation I-Core Teams program, those startup teams are expected to conduct at a minimum 100 interviews. As an entrepreneur, you should expect to conduct many hundreds of interviews over the course of your startup journey. And even as your company becomes more established, good organizations continue to conduct customer discovery as they continue to serve and provide services for their customers. So why do we think that we need to do so much primary research? The truth is that many of us don't even realize all the things that we don't know. We understand what we do know, and we may even conceptualize some of what we don't know. But there is quite a large amount of information about particular spaces, particular experiences that your customers may be going through that we really don't fully understand. So those unknown unknowns are what we are really trying to get after by conducting this customer discovery. We all cannot have the same human experiences. As a result, we need to really get into the mindset and build empathy for those folks that we are trying to service with our solution, and really begin to put ourselves in their shoes to conceptualize what their experience is and what their true needs are. So just as a reminder, the process that we're taking you through is you really initiate with a guess. You're hypothesizing. So you build a business thesis, a set of hypotheses, and then interview questions based on those hypotheses to then go out and test. The testing is the actual interview process where you're asking your customer particular questions in the hopes that you will either validate or invalidate some of your hypotheses. When you're during the interview process, you're also listening. You're going to be doing hopefully a lot more listening than you will be asking. So the goal is here that you'll be spending 80% of your time listening to your customer and about 20% of your time in the interview talking. Now, the 80% of the time when you're listening, what you're really hoping to get from them are actual stories of what their current situation is, what their major pain points are in their current experience. This will help you start to identify what really needs to be solved. The analysis piece of this process is what we're talking about today. So, how do you take what it is that you're hearing during these interviews and effectively decipher what it is you heard or what it is you think you heard and turn it into insights and turn it into other pieces of information that can help drive pivots to your startup journey and pivots to the concept that you're building that will more effectively answer the customer's needs and wants. During your interviews, you should be taking copious notes. Ideally, if you're interviewing in person, you'll be taking notes on pen and paper so that you don't appear to be distracted on a computer screen. Um, During COVID, however, since we are conducting many of these interviews over video conferencing tools, you can take notes on your computer, but it would be advisable for you to let your interviewee know that you will be taking notes during the interview so that they don't feel as though you are not engaged in the conversation. Ideally, you'll do these interviews in pairs, and one person will be dedicated to moving the conversation along, and the other person would be dedicated to taking notes. So what do you do with all these notes? Um, these notes will most likely be you capturing specific scenarios the customer is talking through, or you may even be capturing actual quotes from them. In an ideal setting, you would actually take these notes out of your notebook and start to put them on movable pieces of paper, post-its, or if you wanted to cut up your notes that you took, so that you can start to group and move them around into patterns and into buckets. Now, realistically, it may not quite look like this, so we'll talk through some of that in a minute. Just as a reminder, if you thought that it was difficult sometimes to provide insights or narratives based on quantitative data, it can be much more difficult to do the same thing for qualitative data because you're not looking at concrete black and white numbers, you're looking at a conversation and trying to decipher what's being said in between the lines, so to speak. Just like the interview itself is a bit of an art, right? There's an art to these types of open-ended, conversational, ethnographic interviewing. There is also an art to deciphering what's being said during those interviews. People won't directly come out and tell you exactly what they need or exactly what they want you to build. Rather, they'll be able to relay to you what their experience has been, and it's up to you to begin to decipher where there are major gaps in that experience and how you can improve it for them. So trying to understand what was really being said. It's like on one hand you're hearing specifically what they are saying to you, but on the other hand you also need to try to understand what they're not saying to you or what is meant by what they're saying to you. Looking at their body language can also be a tremendous asset when you're trying to decipher what's being said. So try to pay attention to whether or not they seem excited or if they seem stressed. All of these things are cues to understand and decipher what is being said. That is why we highly recommend that you conduct these interviews over video rather than via a phone call. Truthfully, many of you in this process, you're going to, at least at the start, feel very lost. And that's totally normal. It can be really challenging to get the hang of this. But ultimately, you're going to begin to start to see those patterns across a particular interview or multiple customer interviews. Again, this is an ideal state for qualitative research, is that you would be able to create a research wall or a war wall. This is where you would start to capture all of this primary research and you would be able to move your quote-unquote data points around your wall so that you could start to group and see patterns and build insights. It's basically like if you've ever seen any crime or detective types of TV shows or movies and you see the crime wall where they're trying to solve the mystery. You are similarly trying to solve a mystery, the mystery of what your customer needs, and to the point of what they're willing to actually pay for and buy from you. So that is what a startup journey is. You're essentially solving a bit of a mystery. So again, it helps to keep things physical, although it may not exactly end up looking like this for you. So, what is the point of all this, right? Ultimately, the customer discovery interviews are not just an exercise in you going out and getting to know them. You are really trying to pull insight from your customer conversations. You want to start to see patterns across these interviews so that you can make some decisions about your business. And what's really challenging is how to manage all of this information. And we've talked through some of it above, but I've been giving you a little bit of the ideal situation. So, what might it really look like? What it might really look like is that you might end up with all these notes just stuck in your notebook. And you might end up using different colored highlighters, for example, to try to highlight those areas where you are starting to see patterns across multiple conversations. Or you might start capturing the big aha moments of your conversations on different colored post-its, and you might start grouping those. If you are capturing your notes digitally, you'll have an opportunity to try to start grouping those in things like an Excel spreadsheet, or there are other useful softwares like Mural, where you can begin to group what you're hearing. So again, you're going to want to group and categorize or label your notes from your various interviews. So once you start to see a pattern, you're going to start to put all of your notes or quotes from a variety of interviews into a particular group. You then want to label that group based off of what is the common thing that is being said with that group of data points. So what might this look like in reality? In reality, it may end up being that you're scratching things off on a whiteboard, or that you're grouping your post-its and you're kind of categorizing it that way. So again, you're looking for patterns across your interviews. What have you heard more than once? And ideally, it's not just more than once, but it's things that you're starting to hear 3, 5, 10 times over and over again. Things that you're hearing over and over again start to be a strong indicator of what is really going on in a particular space with your customers. Once you have groups established, you want to label your groups in the voice of the customer. This will help you keep that mindset and also continue to build empathy. So, for example, you might have something like, "We need security measures that are easily adopted by our employees." So you can see by saying "we need" or "I need," you can put it into the voice of the interviewee. These various groups of data points are going to become your insights. You're going to use your insights to pivot your solution to meet your customer needs. Your insights are going to help you determine whether or not you have validated or invalidated your customer segments and your value propositions. Are you even talking to the right people? And the value propositions that you thought were the ones that you were solving for, are they in fact going to be beneficial to this customer group? Is it a real value you can provide to them? You'll also start to begin to see whether or not the solution that you were hoping to bring to the table is the right one. Your business thesis and your hypotheses will start to be proved or disproved. And remember, any changes that you might make to your business thesis or your hypotheses or your business model canvas, any changes that you make there should be evidence-based. And when we say evidence-based, we mean you should be able to point to the particular customer or set of customers that you talked to and specifically what they said, what scenario they told you about, or what quote they had that can really back up why you're making a change to the direction of your business model and the direction of your startup concept. Now that we've gone through that, I want to take you through a particular process for building insights from customer discovery interviews that's known as affinitization. And this comes from ethnographic research methodologies. And we're going to talk to you about how to actually take all of that stuff that you heard, that's all that stuff down in the yellow, and start to level it up into an actual insight or a category. So as you start to have a lot of notes and quotes that are grouping under a particular pattern, what you want to do is you want to potentially label this group in the form of a need that you're hearing. And ultimately, you'll have several needs that can come into the form of an insight. So let's say you have a need that is, I need a daily to-do list to help me track progress. I want my to-do list printed in front of me. I don't want to be interrupted with non-critical stuff. So ultimately, the insight there is, or what the customer needs, is they just want to be shown what they have to get done. And you can see that these needs listed underneath of it are all informed by specific quotes, specific examples from the customer discovery interviews. So we're going to take you through an example of a large corporation that was undergoing an innovation transformation in an attempt to make to encourage the employees to be more innovative as they were coming up with new processes and new products and services. So what happened is, in this large corporation, they underwent a process where they wanted to interview all of their employees to see what it would take for them to find more opportunity to be innovative in their day-to-day work. So a large amount of customer discovery was conducted on the employee base. And here's just a few examples of some of the data that came out of that process. So you can see that some employees were talking about how they were having to have meetings at their desks in an open work environment. You had an employee talk about how when they had special projects, they had nowhere to meet with their teams. There wasn't enough conference room space. You can see that an HR employee was saying that they couldn't concentrate on trying to be innovative in any way with the processes that they were in charge of because um, they were inundated with their tasks that they had to get through, and there was no opportunity for them to think creatively. Another employee talked about how they didn't have the inspiration or the education to figure out how to be more innovative with their particular job description. So they needed to feel educated and inspired, and also like they had the right resources to go about coming up with new innovations for their particular job function. So how do we take these yellow Post-its, which is really the data points from your interviews, and we want to group those up into some needs. So we decided that we have a couple of yellow data points that could be analyzed into stating that we need a dedicated collaboration and meeting space. We had a couple others that said we need a centralized innovation space to learn and work on special projects. Ultimately, these can be leveled up to saying, what is the insight? The insight is that we want to be provided with a dedicated innovation space with the right resources. Ultimately, that leads us to what we're trying to achieve, which is to build an innovation space. So then we want to kind of develop out this insight here, right? We want to make it a little bit more interesting or easy to kind of leverage as we're going through pivoting and ideation. So we'll say things like, let's give it a catchy title, like give me space. Okay, the insight or the need that's being described. Employees need space to feel like they can dedicate themselves to coming up with innovative solutions that will benefit the company. Or you can reframe it into an opportunity statement to say, there is an opportunity to build a physical space that's filled with the right resources and tools where employees can go brainstorm about the innovative solutions and begin to build an MVP. So you can see by just taking a little bit of time to define the particular insight or pattern that you're seeing in customer discovery that you now have something that you can take forward and begin to come up with pivots and new solutions around. Another step that you can add into this is to create what we call how might we statements. So these are broken out pieces. You sort of take the opportunity statement and break it out further into actionable how might we statements that you can then brainstorm off of and come up with new ideas and new aspects to your solution, or perhaps a new solution entirely. So, how might we build a central physical location that is attractive and engaging? How might we fill the space with the right tools and resources? So, you can see by getting a little bit more specific here with this opportunity, we are now starting to come up with call to actions like, okay, I need to think of how to make this innovation space attractive. I need to think of how to make it engaging. I need to try to figure out what are the right tools and resources to help educate and empower my employees. So you can start to see the specifics pan out, and from there, you're able to actually map out a plan or a better solution for the insight that you heard in the customer discovery. Now, this is a very ideal state in terms of how you create insights from customer interviews and then how you could go leverage them. I want to remind you that in reality, when you're doing a startup, it's much more scrappy. And so you may be looking at your notes that look like this, and you may be looking at your groupings or the way that you're creating patterns and trying to figure out insights. They might start to look like this, and they're a bit more scrappy than this process that I just took you through. However, I wanted to make sure that you understood an approach to being very thorough with this type of primary research so that if you have the time or energy, you can make an attempt to employ it. So again, the how might we's will help you brainstorm new questions to ask or hypothesize or potentially attributes for your minimum viable product. Um, these insights are really going to be the stepping stones for connecting your customer needs to your actual solution. So a lot of times when people engage with this process, they go out and they conduct the customer discovery, but they aren't able to point, and then they go ahead and they build their solution. And sometimes what they heard in customer discovery does make its way into the solution, and sometimes it doesn't. They're not able to necessarily point specifically back to what they heard and connect it to something that they've done with their startup concept. So, this process allows you to actually take what you heard and begin to um, use it to inform your next set of hypotheses or any kind of brainstorming activity you might conduct with your startup team to improve or pivot your product or your concept. So again, you're going through this iterative process where you need to assess what's going on, what you're hearing in the interview, and you need to analyze it. And that analysis is going to feed right back into you being able to guess again with new hypotheses or to pivot your solution or what it is you think you need to build. And just as a reminder, ultimately, it's not just about capturing exactly what was said, but really digging in deep and trying to understand what was being said. And this takes a lot more than just looking at the words on paper of what that took place during the interview. This takes a lot more nuance and art. You need to be able to examine the body language that's taken place during the interview process. You need to try to dig in when you hear them start to hint about a particular need or a particular pain that they might have experienced during their journey as a customer. And you need to be able to really listen and build empathy with the people that you're talking to. Ultimately, changes need to be evidence-based. They need to be based in what you're hearing during the interviews. But ultimately, you are the innovator, you are the inventor, you are the entrepreneur. So while you are getting informed by the customer, it is up to you to interpret and analyze what it is you're hearing and to try to make the appropriate changes to your solution and to your startup, and to the business model that you hope to build as a part of your startup. So I hope this has been helpful in terms of how you can take all of that information that you're receiving during customer discovery and actually inject it into the way in which you're iterating and pivoting your business model, and iterating and pivoting on your hypotheses and your concept as you move forward in your startup journey.